The humidity in the New Orleans Bayou doesn't just sit on your skin. It gets into your lungs. Heavy and thick like the secrets my daughter-in-law, Bianca, thought she was keeping. I'm Silas Thorne, and I spent 40 years pulling sunken steel from the bottom of the Gulf. I know when a structure is under tension long before it snaps. It started when Bianca began managing my son's medical records after his diving accident. She didn't want him to get better. She wanted him compliant, a ghost in his own house, while she positioned herself to sell my salvage fleet to a predatory offshore conglomerate. I didn't confront her. In the diving world, if you ascend too fast, you die. You have to decompress. I began my own decompression by renting a derelict shipping container in a yard at the edge of the port of New Orleans. Every time I caught her misplacing my son's physical therapy schedule or whispering into her burner phone about liquidation dates, I logged it. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a black box recorder for a crash in flight. Bianca thought I was a senile old diver with nitrogen bubbles for brains. She didn't realize that my forgetfulness was a mask. While she was at charity galas playing the devoted wife of a disabled veteran, I was in that container, cross-referencing her offshore bank accounts with the mystery supplements she was feeding my son. The air in that yard smelled of diesel and rot, a perfect reflection of the marriage she had built on a foundation of sand. The inciting incident wasn't a whispered conversation. It was a physical discovery. I found a specialized limited power of attorney hidden in the lining of her designer briefcase, a document that would give her the right to sign off on my son's end-of-life care if he had another complication. My son wasn't dying, but Bianca was already shopping for his casket and my company's stock options. The pressure was reaching the bursting point, and I was the only one holding the valve. I realized then that she wasn't just waiting for a natural tragedy. She was actively engineering a catastrophe that would leave her as the sole beneficiary of 40 years of my blood and sweat. She had replaced his actual heart medication with high-dose stimulants, hoping his next rehab session in the pressure tank would be his last. I watched her through the security feed I'd secretly installed in the kitchen, her face glowing in the light of the refrigerator as she tampered with his evening dose. She moved with the grace of a shark, silent and focused, unaware that the senile man upstairs was recording every tilt of the vial. I sat in the dark of that shipping container, the rain drumming against the corrugated steel, knowing that if I moved too soon, I'd lose my son forever. If I waited too long, the ocean would claim him. The container became my war room, a sanctuary of cold logic in a city of sweltering lies. I spent the next 2 months living a double life, playing the doting, slightly confused grandfather at the dinner table while building a digital cage for Bianca in the dead of night. She had moved her operations to a private server, thinking her consultations with the offshore conglomerate were invisible. She was wrong. I had tapped the house's router months ago, and I watched in real time as she negotiated the price of my fleet, my life's work, as if it were scrap metal. The deeper I dug, the more the accident that had paralyzed my son, Elias, looked like a setup. I found encrypted emails between Bianca and a corrupt safety inspector from the harbor. They had discussed a faulty regulator weeks before Elias went down in the Gulf. It wasn't just a business takeover. It was a slow-motion execution. Bianca wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional liquidator who had targeted my family because we were asset-heavy and oversight-light. She viewed our history as an obstacle to her commission. I started noticing the subtle ways she was gaslighting Elias. She'd tell him the doctors said he'd never walk again, then hide the physical therapy progress reports that suggested otherwise. She was keeping him in a mental fog, using a cocktail of unprescribed sedatives to ensure he didn't question why his signature was appearing on corporate merger documents he'd never seen. Every time I saw her kiss his forehead, I had to grip the table to keep from shaking. She was poisoning the well and calling it medicine. I began to leak bait into our conversations, mentioning a hidden safe in the shipyard office that supposedly held the original titles to the fleet It was a lie, of course. I wanted to see how fast she'd scramble to verify it. Within 6 hours, my remote alerts triggered. She hadn't gone to the office. She had called her contractor, the same safety inspector who had sabotaged my son's gear. They weren't just waiting for Elias to fade away. They were planning a structural failure at the yard that would take me out too. The realization that my own home was a hunting ground changed everything. I stopped recording and started maneuvering. I had to show Elias the monster he was sharing a bed with, but I had to do it without breaking what little spirit he had left. I was fighting a war on two fronts, one against a predator in high heels and another against the clock. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, drop your city in the comments. The contractor Bianca called wasn't a builder. He was a cleaner named Miller, a man whose reputation in the docks was built on making problems disappear into the silt of the Mississippi. I tracked their meetings through the GPS I'd slapped under her SUV. They met at a dive bar in Algiers, far from the polished life she led in the Garden District. I sat in my truck 2 blocks away, listening through a long-range mic as they finalized the ventilation failure for the shipyard office. They were planning to burn 40 years of history just to erase the paper trail of their fraud. I knew I couldn't go to the local authorities yet. Bianca had spent months befriending the precinct captain's wife, building a social shield that would make any accusation from a grieving elderly father look like a mental breakdown. I needed the kind of evidence that didn't just suggest guilt but screamed it. I spent 48 hours straight in the shipping container, stitching together the audio of her murder plot with the video of her tampering with Elias's medication. I created a digital dead man switch. If I didn't check in every 6 hours, the entire file would be blasted to every major news outlet and federal agency in the state. The hardest part was the quiet. I had to sit across from her at breakfast, watching her pour coffee for my son, while knowing she had already priced out the gasoline for my office. Elias looked at me that morning, his eyes clearing from the sedative fog for the first time in weeks. I'd been secretly swapping his meds for placebos, and the light was finally coming back into his gaze. "Dad," he whispered when she left the room, "why does the house smell like a hospital and a funeral home at the same time?" I didn't answer with words. I handed him a single earbud connected to my phone. For 10 minutes, he sat in his wheelchair and listened to his wife discuss the acceptable loss of his life. I watched the man I raised shatter and then rebuild himself in the span of a few heartbeats. The shock didn't break him. It cauterized him. He didn't cry. He just looked at the kitchen door and then back at me, his jaw set with the same iron resolve that had made him the best deep-sea welder in the Gulf. We didn't have time for a slow recovery. Miller was scheduled to hit the yard at midnight. Elias and I spent the afternoon in a silent, coordinated dance of preparation. He used his paralysis as a cover, watching Bianca's movements while I rigged the shipyard office with a different kind of surprise. I wasn't going to let them burn it down. I was going to let them walk right into a trap where the only thing that would be incinerated was their freedom. The tide was coming in, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one holding my breath. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusting hulls and silent cranes under the moonless New Orleans sky. I waited in the shadows of the mezzanine, watching the security feed on my tablet. At exactly 12:15 a.m., a shadow detached itself from the perimeter fence. It was Miller, carrying a heavy duffel bag that smelled faintly of accelerant even through the digital screen. He didn't know that the secret safe I'd baited Bianca with was actually a high-definition thermal camera rig disguised as a junction box. He moved with a professional's gait, heading straight for the central archives where I'd staged the original fleet titles. I heard the heavy clatter of the shipyard's side door. It wasn't just Miller. Bianca had shown up to witness the tragedy. She couldn't help herself. She wanted to see the legacy of Thorne salvage turn to ash before the sun came up. I watched her through the lens as she checked her watch, her face illuminated by the blue light of her phone. She was likely checking the offshore wire transfer status. She looked impatient, like a shopper waiting for a slow clerk, completely oblivious to the fact that Elias was sitting 3 feet behind her in the darkened foreman's office. When the light slammed on, the sound was like a gunshot in the cavernous space. Bianca screamed, spinning around to find Elias standing and supported in the doorway. The paralyzed son she had been drugging for years was now a 6-foot wall of righteous fury. I stepped out onto the mezzanine, looking down at them like a judge from a high bench. Miller reached for his waistband, but he froze when he saw the red laser dots from the private security team I'd hired with the last of my liquid savings. "The safe is empty, Bianca," I shouted, my voice echoing off the corrugated steel. "But the cloud is full." I held up my tablet, showing her the live-streamed confession she had just provided to the federal servers. I didn't just have her for the arson. I had her for the attempted murder of my son and the systematic poisoning of a veteran. The look on her face wasn't one of regret. It was the frantic, twitching mask of a cornered animal realizing the trap had been set years before she even walked into the yard. She tried to bargain, her voice shifting back into that sweet, manipulative trill she'd used to dismantle my family. "Elias, honey, he's confusing you. The meds made you hallucinate." But Elias didn't flinch. He walked forward and dropped the heavy, tampered regulator from his accident onto the concrete floor between them. The sound of the metal hitting the ground was the final gavel. If you've ever had to fight to prove the truth to people who refuse to see it, like this video and tell us your story below. The federal indictment was a 500-page autopsy of Bianca's ambition. As the trial unfolded in the heart of New Orleans, the courtroom felt like a decompression chamber where the lies were slowly bled out under high pressure. The prosecution didn't just rely on my surveillance. They presented the Project Reef digital trail, showing how Bianca had negotiated the sale of our fleet to a shell company, tied to a notorious maritime liquidator. She hadn't just been a cheating spouse, she was a corporate saboteur. Every medical complication Elias suffered was revealed as a timed event on her calendar, calculated to coincide with stock market fluctuations. Miller flipped within 48 hours of the arrest, trading a confession for a reduced sentence and providing the final link between the sabotage diving gear and Bianca's burner phone. In the witness box, I watched Bianca's defense team try to paint me as a paranoid, vengeful patriarch. It didn't stick. The jury watched the video of her systematically replacing life-saving heart medication with industrial stimulants, her face as calm as a mirror. The devoted wife persona evaporated, leaving behind a woman so consumed by the math of her own greed that she had forgotten the humanity of her victims. The verdict was a relentless string of guilty counts that took the foreman 20 minutes to read. For the attempted murder of Elias, the arson, and the massive scale of the wire fraud, Bianca was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of early release. Trevor Walsh, the corrupt inspector, was stripped of his credentials and handed 15 years for his role in the sabotage. As the bailiffs led her away, she finally looked at Elias, but he didn't look back. He was busy looking at a set of blueprints for a new deep-sea research facility, finally focused on a future that wasn't being dictated by a syringe. The recovery wasn't the cinematic moment the media wanted. It was slow, painful work. Elias had to detox from the cocktail of drugs she'd forced into his system, a process that left him physically weak but mentally sharper than ever. We had to dismantle the corporate mess she'd made, clawing back the fleet from the brink of a forced merger. It cost us nearly half our liquid assets to buy back our own name, but for the first time in years, the Thorne Salvage logo didn't feel like a target. It felt like a survivor's badge, a testament to the fact that some foundations are built to withstand the storm. We sat on the deck of the lead salvage boat a month after the sentencing, the smell of salt and diesel finally replacing the scent of bleach and hospital corridors. Elias still walked with the cane, but his grip was firm as he held a cup of coffee. He didn't ask me why I waited so long to show him the truth. He knew the answer, in the deep. You don't move until you're sure of the line. The betrayal had left a scar, but it was the kind of scar that reminded us we were unbreakable. The ledger was finally closed, and the air was clear. Thorne's salvage doesn't look like a corporate empire anymore. It looks like a workshop again. We sold the flashy Garden District estate and moved our operations back to the water's edge, where the heartbeat of the company originally started. Elias and I spent our mornings on the dock, the rhythm of the tides dictating our schedule rather than the frantic demands of a board of directors. He's back in the water now, not as a commercial welder, but as a safety consultant. He uses his experience to train the next generation of divers on how to spot the invisible failures before they become fatal. The shipping container in the yard is still there, but the monitors are dark and the wires have been pulled. I keep it as a reminder that vigilance isn't a hobby, it's a life jacket. People ask me how I could live under the same roof as a monster for 3 years without snapping. I tell them that when you're submerged in a lie that deep, you don't thrash. Thrashing uses up your oxygen. You breathe slow, you check your gauges, and you wait for the light. We didn't just survive a fraud, we survived a total structural collapse of our trust. I've started a small foundation for maritime workers who have been victims of corporate exploitation. We provide the legal and investigative resources that I had to build from scratch. In that dark shipping container, it's my way of ensuring that the Silas Thornes of the world don't have to fight their battles in total isolation. The money Bianca tried to steal is now the fuel for a machine that protects people like my son. It's a poetic kind of justice. The predator's teeth are now being used to guard the flock. Elias still has bad days where the phantom weight of the drugs pulls at his mind. But he doesn't reach for a bottle anymore. He reaches for a wrench. We don't talk about Bianca. She is a ghost serving time in a concrete box, a footnote in the real story of our family. Our relationship isn't restored. It's forged. You can't go through a fire like that and come out the same, but you can come out harder, tempered by the truth and bound by a loyalty that no contract could ever replicate. As the sun dips below the horizon, turning the Gulf into a sheet of liquid gold, I realize the pressure is finally gone. We aren't holding our breath anymore. We are standing on the deck of a ship we rebuilt with our own hands, heading into a future where the only thing we have to fear is the sea itself. The mission is complete, the salvage is successful, and for the first time in a long time, the air is easy to breathe. We've finally reached the surface, and the view is spectacular.